We are talking about a win streak, ladies and gentlemen, a Bengals win streak. 2 in a row the Cincinnati Bengals pull off this week. Just an absolutely wild win against the Tennessee Titans. Old friend Bill Callahan, Chidobe Awuzie, Tyler Boyd, all of the crew was there, and there was, some very interesting moments with some of those people. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some of the things we witnessed in the game, on the sidelines, and some other aspects. I'm Anthony Cosenza. He is John Sheeran. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast, and happy to be talking about another Bengals win. Their playoff hopes are alive, John Sheeran.
Was it like 5% now? It went from like 2% to 5%. We got the win scenarios now. We're breaking them down. Man, like that game was like, we talked so much in like October about how they can't win ugly games and how they just fall short. And like that was like the epitome of a game that like you need to win in order to get into this spot, because it's arguably the craziest game that I've seen in a long time covering this team for a lot of reasons. And it's just not a game that, regardless of the opponent, that they've been able to win in recent weeks and recent years, whatever the case may be. So wild one for sure.
There were parts where I was like almost laughing. I'm like, this is just ridiculous what happened. I do want to start off with a little bit of, I guess, an apology to our listeners. We had slated a pretty good guest here. We were going to get that interview to you today or tomorrow. Unfortunately, just didn't pan out, but it was one of the gentlemen you saw on the you see in the intro and outro video, if you watch the video side of things with us, Mr. T. Higgins, who is doing a charitable event in Raising Cane's in Cincinnati. He's kind of carrying the torch from Joe Mixon doing the holiday bike giveaway, which is a really cool event. We thought we would be able to get a few minutes with him today, but unfortunately it didn't work out. So I apologize, but still wanted to give him a tip of the cap for doing something cool for the local kids of Cincinnati at Raising Cane's.
Obviously spending time with kids in the holidays is a lot more important than talking to us, but obviously very busy man this time of year and a busy weekend for sure.
Yeah, we were in touch with his reps and everything, and we had it kind of set up, and it just, didn't work out in the end. But still, like you said, important, more important that he was spending time with the local people, with the kids, and giving away bikes and stuff. So check that out how you can. We appreciate the effort on his end and his representatives' end to try and make that happen. And unfortunately, I apologize to all of you. We kind of teased it a little bit and didn't work out, but hopefully we'll get him back on the show down the road. But he was one of the big play guys this week in the Titans game. That he had, what was it, 6 for 88, 7 for 88, I think, in this one, including the big touchdown on a third and what seemed like forever. Long ball, takes a hit to the midsection on his way tumbling into the end zone. Great play there. There was just a flurry of, the Bengals were down. I'm trying to recap this in my mind's eye here. The Bengals were down 14-7. I think it was in the second quarter, if I'm not mistaken. It was off of I think the Tennessee Titans had scored off of a Burrow fumble. Then all of a sudden there's a Levis fumble. Bengals go and they score a touchdown to Sam Hubbard to tie the game up, corner of the end zone. Then ensuing possession, Will Levis pick. Bengals get another touchdown. I think that was the T touchdown, if I'm not mistaken, on that one. And then another interception that, it turned into a field goal in a hurry there. So the Bengals scored 17 points right in a row there. They ended up getting a pick six from Geno Stone. And another would have been fumble recovery for a touchdown, if not for a little bit of a premature celebration by Mr. Jordan Battle. Still, big plays all over the place on defense. A lot of turnovers, but tons of sloppy play, including that from the Bengals in this one, John. A lot of penalties. Joe Burrow, 3 turnovers, etc.
It's one of those games where both punters are kind of just twiddling their thumbs, not necessarily because of competence, but because of just everything. Just looking at the drive log, it goes interception, touchdown, 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 fumble, fumble, touchdown, interception, field goal. That was just the first half, right? So you had another half of just insanity that follows that. The fact that Tavondre Sweat, a guy that we're all very familiar with, his fumble recovery with a juke and a stiff arm on another 300-something pound man was not even the big man highlight of the day, I guess, technically, if you want to count Sam Hubbard's, I guess, the first offensive touchdown for a Bengals defensive player since the first year that this team existed in 1968. I honestly lost count of all the Titans turnovers. Somehow, I think it ended up being 6, and that's why the total was 10, which there had not been a game of 10 turnovers in total since 2007. We're going back to the 3 launch year. Hasn't been a game with like 26 combined penalties and I think ever. So 36 combined penalties and turnovers in a game, Anthony, where for at least most of the first half, Bengals fans were irate with the refs. There were a lot of bad calls, a lot of unexplainable calls. I think the Titans ended up getting screwed a couple of times too at the end. So really no side, I think, was happy with the officiating. It was one of the more heavily flag heavy officiating crews in the league this year. So that was kind of a recipe for disaster. I also thought, Anthony, like, it's kind of a lot of narrative fuel for a game with Zach Taylor coaching against one of his former assistants, Brian Callahan, and this game happened to have just a calamitous amount of self-inflicted errors and penalties and turnovers and everything. I don't know what that says about. I think it's just more of a coincidence, but also it's not a great timing for those two coaches to meet and to have this game kind of unfold. But I really do think the takeaway here is exactly what I kind of said last week. Titans are kind of a mess, and if the Bengals don't go out there and just capitalize on it, then it's more of an indictment on them. And that's why, they should have won by 16. They gave up a touchdown at the very end. So I think the score was closer than it actually was, but the Bengals were able to survive throughout all of their own mistakes because the Titans just ended up making more. And then the Bengals just did what they did and they just capitalized on it, which I think they really had to do.
Yeah. I mean, technically the Bengals should have won by 23 if that battle situation doesn't happen.
For
right. Sure. There's just inexplicable things that happened in this one, in both the positive and the negative. And I think where my head is at here is we're talking about playoff spots, we're talking about different things happening for the Bengals, their chances are alive, etc.
You muted yourself. I think Anthony's mic might have cut out on him a little bit. There we go.
There we go. I think my back.
Yeah,
but it's not coming in clear.
Okay, I'll check it out. But my point, John, is when you look at it,
the quality of the wins here, the quality of the quarterbacks, etc. What does that tell you? I mean, last week it's Cooper Rush. This week it's Will Levis and then Mason Rudolph. You can go back to the Raiders game and their quarterback situation. You had Desmond Ray. I mean, the quarterbacks they are beating, the teams they are beating at this point, even though, yes, you got to play who's on your schedule. Yes, you got to beat the teams in front of you. I still worry as we get down the stretch with a Denver and a Pittsburgh. Who knows if Pittsburgh's going to be resting players at that point, but I still worry if the Bengals were somehow to shake things up and get into the postseason. Yes, I think a lot of teams would be afraid to play them because of the amount of points they can score and how Joe Burrow is playing right now. But I still worry about style points, I guess, quality of wins, that sort of thing. If we are talking about anything realistic, making the playoffs, making noise in the playoffs.
Oh my God! If they were vying for the college football playoff, their resume would be destroyed, regardless of their amount of wins. Right? That would just be like, you're not beating anyone. You're 6-1 against losing teams. And you're 0-7 against winning teams. I mean, the trend is pretty clear in that regard. So this is why the Bengals were road favorites against the very definition of erratic quarterback play in Will Levis. And credit to Will, I guess, like ever since he came back from an injury. He had been playing cleaner football, but again, we just kind of saw the reasons as to why there were so many questions with Levis, throughout this season, and how it seemed like every week he just had a memeable turnover, and he had like three of them today, three of them on Sunday that were just completely inexcusable. And it would have been a damning sentence on the Bengals if they weren't able to take advantage of that. And, I think there is a point to, like you said, in the beginning of the game, the Titans offense was kind of pounding it down the middle, and the Bengals defense didn't really have a lot of answers for that. So they found themselves in a hole, and you weren't really sure how this Bengals offensive line with Devin Cochran at left tackle, you weren't really sure how they were going to withstand, the Titans pass rush with the lead. So they were able to kind of absorb that and overcome that. But 100%, man, like this, it doesn't really tell us that much about if this team has really grown over the past couple weeks. Like they're able to beat, a downtrodden Cowboys team in a setting that the Cowboys have typically lost more times than not this year. And you beat the Titans, and, that doesn't really move the needle that much. It keeps you alive for sure, but there's still a ton of questions about this defense. And I don't think you have any real confidence in them being able to win a low scoring game in the postseason against the best offenses. Like Josh Allen and the Bills, the most likely team that they would face if the Bengals were the number 7 seed, that offense looks unstoppable, mainly just because of him. Like he's just having a bona fide MVP caliber year, and he's doing everything. And you just wonder how this Bengals defense, now that's down a couple more players after this week, how they were able to manage against him or any other offense that they would face in the playoffs. There's still so many questions that I think we kind of already know the answer to, but they're just taking advantage of the teams on their schedule right now because they didn't expect, I guess, this part of the schedule to be not easy, but not as difficult as it is.
Well, they do have the Browns coming up here, and then the big one against the Broncos. That's going to tell you a lot of things, and of course the finale against the Steelers. But as I mentioned, you don't know if the Steelers, where they're going to be positioned and if they're going to be resting guys. Somehow I don't. I still don't know if Tomlin's the type of guy that would be, let's rest all the guys. I don't know. And still, even if they were to rest Russ, Justin Fields, who has beaten the Bengals in the past, played some good football earlier this year anyway. So, I mean, there's some problems there. But regardless, that's looking down the line. You got to beat who's in front of you, which is who are the Browns. The Bengals have traditionally had some trouble, at least the last few years, with the Browns. Beat them last go around after Watson got hurt in the game. So now they face Jameis Winston, who's been all over the map, putting up a ton of points and giving up a ton of points on pick sixes, etc., which is basically who he's been as a pro quarterback. So at any rate, I mean, look, it's great to see the Bengals overcome mistakes. It's great to see them, still get a double-digit win, a multiple possession win, that sort of thing. But it was troubling because, like you said, the big amount of turnovers, the big amount of penalties, that has never been an earmark of Zach Taylor teams, particularly the penalties. That has just never been who they have been. And it was just, kind of a bad day at the office, so to speak. Offensive line was a little out of sorts in terms of communication and false starts and all kinds of different things. There were just some elements of this game where you just go, man, one such occasion, I think it was pretty late in the game, 4th and 5, 4th and 4, something like that. And Joe gets him to jump off sides and they don't snap the football. And so then the Bengals get called for the delay of game penalty and then end up punting the ball. It was just one of those things where you just go, oh man, I think it was Arden Key who had jumped off sides in that situation. So you just go, man, it was just that type of day. And thankfully for the Bengals, it was that type of day for both teams, really. Like you said, calls weren't going their way from the officials and things just weren't falling their way, bad turnovers, that sort of thing for both teams. The Bengals and the turnovers that they were able to create from the defense were largely bigger plays than one such occasion too. This was a little thing, but there was a ball. I think Gesicki dropped it. There was a little short pass and Gesicki kind of dropped it, tipped it up in the air. And there was kind of just a difference in the teams in the day where Mike Hilton made that diving interception off of a tipped ball. And the other cornerback, his name escapes me at the moment, but he hit the ball, kind of came on him quick, but it was right there, and just he wasn't able to handle it. And that's just an earmark of what's now a 3-11 team. And the Titans, they just they're not catching the breaks, they're not making the plays.
Yeah, and they're just at least a year or two away from being competitive, even in a bad division. Like the NFL obviously is known for parity and how close teams are, but I think you did see the difference in talent between the Bengals and the Titans. And obviously, like you said, when Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins come knocking at your door, there's already an advantage there for the orange and black. And, all three of those guys, showed out. And then I think on defense, I think you saw the parts of this defense that had yet to really kind of broken through, even against some bad teams this year. Like that disparity, I think, was on display too. And that just shows you how much, quality quarterback play is. Because even in, the late part of the game when Mason Rudolph came in, the Bengals defense was playing a lot more conservative. Like, you still had Rudolph making quality decisions and not putting the game in the hands of the Bengals just having to make plays. Like he just took what was in front of him. I'm going to say all the cliches possible right now, just quality game managing quarterback play, but that's what happened, right? And you wonder how different the game would have been if they had a quarterback, if Will Levis took that type of approach, because that was the approach that Russell Wilson took against them a couple weeks ago. And I think it's still just a pretty winning strategy to just not give the Bengals defense freebies like that, because they don't have a consistent pass rush. And when you make their lives easier, then the talents of those guys that they expected to be good this year, it was able to shine through in this game. So you really just saw the difference in between Joe Burrow and Will Levis and how they lead a team.
Yeah, the Mason Rudolph thing was, for me, quite a bit of here we go again with the Russell Wilson deal. It was quite a bit of that. And Cincinnati ended up, doing just enough and making enough big plays, particularly on defense. Joe Burrow did have 3 touchdowns in this game, but did have 2 interceptions and another fumble lost in this one. So, and we'll talk more about that and some of the things we saw and or maybe heard from him and others in this game here. But I want to transition a little bit. Last week we talked, and before we do, last week we talked about some of the guys who had been struggling that ended up kind of turning a corner and helping out in the Cowboys win. And that was kind of more of the same this week. So we'll talk about that in a second. But I just want to say that, I don't want to say I had my reservations about Chase Brown in a lead type role. I wondered, right? I mean, the sample size has been kind of small in the pros, but he has really risen to the occasion. And particularly, unfortunately, with the Zach Moss injury, but particularly since then, and getting the lion's share of the touches and carries from the running back position, he's become a very versatile weapon. And he had, over 100 scrimmage yards, 2 touchdowns, I think 1 rushing, 1 receiving yesterday, right? So just doing it all for the Bengals. And he's become a really nice weapon for Joe Burrow as things break down. It's a funny, but a really obvious observation and a good one by Daryl Johnston, who was on the telecast yesterday. It's funny that these receivers, probably unlike maybe for the Chiefs too, but probably unlike most of the teams in the NFL, these receivers and running backs just know that whatever route they're running, be prepared to continue to move around and keep things alive, because that's what Burrow does. He did it a number of times. Chase Brown was to 1. There was a great play to T. Higgins on another. So, I mean, there are a number of occasions where things break down and Joe just makes things happen. And so Daryl Johnston brought that up in the telecast, where it's like, man, these guys just know, keep moving, keep going. That where your route supposedly ends is probably not where it's going to end a handful of times in a game.
Yeah. And there was the Chase Brown scramble drill. There were a couple of others that you can kind of name off, but not just that. Also, like when you turn back to the ball, expect the ball to be there. That's like what Jamar Chase is kind of just programmed to do at this point. But to your point about Chase Brown, like, yeah, I think you're just getting to a point where the consistent success on a per rush basis is there. And that goes beyond just yards per carry. I think his yards per carry is like just under 4 in this game, but he's still up there among league leaders and just like overall success rate, just staying ahead of the sticks. And in this game, like they had 5 rushes on 3rd and 4th down. They had 4 of them were successful, right? So you're able to move the chains, getting inside between the tackles, and it's the same explosion every single carry that he gets. Like, it's just foot into the grass or the turf, and he's able to kind of just run through contact as much as he needs to. And I think the player that he is right now is exactly who the Bengals would want him to be. They just didn't want him to do it all by himself. And I still don't think they want him to do it all by himself. They would prefer to have someone else like Khalil Herbert, only getting, instead of 3 carries a game, maybe 6, 7, 8, closer to 10, right? To make sure that he's not overworked and he doesn't, pile up that workload a little bit too much. But so long as he's able to handle it for the rest of the season, I think they want to give him those opportunities to see if his role can be a more sustainably larger role next year. Again, not 20, 25 carries a game, but yeah, if you can handle 15 and at this rate and doing a bunch of different concepts and styles, might as well go for it because he's proving all of that for sure.
Yeah, I think I don't know 20, 25 carries, but maybe 20 touches, right? I mean, I think that's pretty optimum for him. But he's playing very well, and he's been a big part of helping this thing stay alive here. And so have others that have been struggling. I mean, we mentioned Hubbard and Geno Stone and others last week. Again, Hubbard helping out in a different way this week, and maybe to an extent of a sad extent. We'll talk more about that a little later, but helping out the cause. Geno Stone with the big pick six, read that beautifully, just jumped right in front of the receiver there and just took it down the sideline. You saw some others where some other players out there battle getting the, he's been kind of up and down there. And then of course the play that he made was of course just symbolic of, some of the ups and downs he's endured so far as a pro, but still made a big play. And then, there are others out there that are kind of starting to turn a corner. And so now you're looking at Geno Stone becoming one of the best PFF guys the last couple of weeks. And that I don't know. I guess is this now turning into a situation where, oh man, we got to cut this guy next offseason? Is it now saying, well, maybe now things are going a different direction, grasping the defense better, albeit late in the season? Is that where we are with some of these guys? And so now you say, maybe there's more here than we think. Maybe we shouldn't be so quick to say cut these guys.
There's multiple layers here, I think. Along with Geno Stone, McKinley Jackson deserves some credit as well.
Big play
for the forced fumble that he made. I think he's starting to flash more as the guy that he was at Texas A&M. He was always more of a quick penetrator rather than a hold your ground nose tackle. So because of all the injuries at defensive tackle, I think he's starting to kind of get those opportunities. I think Mike Hilton obviously had a great game, and he's been, kind of up and down this year. Miles Murphy had a solid pass rush win rate, even though he wasn't winning quickly necessarily. He was still, getting into the backfield and trying to force those throws. I think with Geno Stone, though, obviously, again, these past 2 weeks have to be weighted in accordance to the quarterbacks that they played and the offenses that they had, right? So Geno Stone taking advantage of not so great offenses led by not so great quarterbacks. I thought it was interesting, though, how, after the game, he was talking about how these past couple weeks, I think he said that Lou Anarumo was kind of simplifying a lot of things from a play calling standpoint, from a schematic standpoint. And I think even the term, it felt like preseason, where it was very vanilla and it just allowed him to kind of play a little bit more freely. Maybe that's made somewhat of a difference. Again, we would prefer to not have these developments happen so late in the season because there's obviously a ton more bad tape than good. Me, Anthony, I'm just thinking about if we're thinking about the future here, I'm thinking about not just the fact that Geno Stone only has 1 year left on his deal. The future of this defense is completely unknown because we don't know which coaches are going to be back and which coaches are going to stay, and if Anarumo is going to be back at all, right? We don't know how that impacts the futures of these guys. And obviously with Stone, who doesn't have contractual stability with only having 1 year left on his deal, it may not matter, how well that he plays to finish out the season. If they hire a new defensive coordinator and he wants a new starting safety out there, Geno Stone's going to be very easy to let go. But at the very least, he's putting up better tape than he did earlier in the season that matches what he did in Baltimore. And he's obviously still extremely young relative to other, fourth and fifth year guys. So there's definitely, I think, hope for him to be a starter next year. I just think it goes beyond just if he plays well at the end of the season, then he stays in Cincinnati, because there's more of a mystery with the future of this defense as a whole, because we don't know what it's going to look like next year. And I think that unfortunately hurts him more than others just because of the contract that he has and the fact that for the first 12 weeks of the season, he was playing like a backup.
What do you, so you're seeing in here, Chris Zito, Pratt's got to go, Bruce E.B. saying cut Von Bell in the live chats here. Basically, and I mean, I guess it does coincide with Lou's future with the team, but I mean, is there a situation where you say, they're even saying, some of these people are saying Logan Wilson on the chopping block, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, do you think in one offseason making that many changes is wise at this point? Or are things that bad where it's like your hand is forced, and you got to kind of look at every single level and probably make those wholesale changes?
Well, I don't think they can cut Logan Wilson even if they wanted to. I think his contract would still kind of prevent them from doing that. But honestly, man, like you're probably looking at least 3 new starters along the defensive line, and you don't even know like if Trey Hendrickson is going to hold out again because he's only got 1 year left on this deal. But you're looking at a couple new defensive tackles. You're looking at probably a new defensive end. You're probably looking at a new linebacker. You're looking at least 1 new cornerback, 1 new safety. Like those are moves that they kind of have to make because again, they just don't have they don't have the answers on the roster. And I think Geno Stone can still prove to be a potential answer to just stay in the building to see if he can, win a spot or just see if he can maintain his spot. So his case may be a little bit unique in that regard, but man, like there's going to be a lot of turnover on the side of the ball. Like they have no choice but to look at those options, and they have obviously a ton of money to make those types of moves happen. But I just think no matter how well they finish this season, they can't ignore the fact that the defense was the main reason why they're in this hole in the first place. And they have a lot of opportunities to get those upgrades if they are able to find them. But the first step is to move forward from the guys that just clearly weren't the answers.
It's great to see players start to step up, but like you said, there is context to take into account here. Quarterbacks, the opposing quarterbacks the past couple of weeks, you do have an up and down Jameis Winston coming up. Same with Bo Nix. Bo Nix either has some of the best throws I've ever seen or some of just Levis-like decisions that I've seen as well. So, I mean, there's those 2 guys. And then, who knows what's going to happen, as I've said a couple times, against the Steelers. We're going to be here a couple of more minutes, talk about a few more things. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast, part of the Believe in Cincy podcast channel, along with a slate of other shows, 3 and Out with Jason and Kevin, talking football with Bengal Jim and friends, and Matt and Willie No Ball with the coach, Matt Minnick and Willie Lutz. Hopefully you are subscribed. You have to resubscribe to the BLEAV in Cincy podcast channel through your favorite streamer, Spotify, iTunes, all that stuff. Leave us a review, resubscribe to the feed if you could. We appreciate that. We've seen the subscribers grow, but we want to get back and then some from where we were before with the new feed. So go check that out. We appreciate you guys resubscribing, leaving reviews, etc. And if you like the video side of things, again, you can catch us on a couple of different Twitter accounts. Thanks for tuning in there, as well as on our the Cincy Jungle Facebook page, and of course on our YouTube channel where we have all of our live streams. We have the 3 and Out shows as well, and some other fun stuff that we have on there, interviews and whatnot. So go check that out. You can subscribe to that and access it. If you're watching the stream through the YouTube channel and you're new to it, go underneath John's side of the window there, and underneath that Cincy Jungle icon, there is a show icon for you to click. Do the subscribe thing, do the bell thing, tell a friend, all that kind of stuff. We appreciate all of you. We appreciate the support that you've shown us for such a long time. And as long as you'll have us, we'll keep bringing you stuff. As long as you just pretend that you like us, I guess. I don't know, that sort of thing. But John, it's time to play Can You Read Lips? It is time to play a game that a lot of people on X have been trying to play the last 24 hours. Of course, I and many others have reposted this video. The person that I saw post it, I believe first, was Marshall Kramsky, local media member. So I gave him credit on Twitter. I want to make sure I give him credit again. Go like his tweet. We are going to show the video here since it has made the rounds over the last couple of last day, basically. And for those who don't know, I don't know how you couldn't if you paid attention yesterday, but basically towards the end of the game, there was an exchange between Zach Taylor and Joe Burrow. And Joe, there are a number of ways to take it, and it's probably a combination of some. But here it is. It's only like 9 seconds, so you got to pay attention quickly. We'll maybe play it a couple times again. Credit to Marshall Kramsky on this one. Embarrassing, it looks like he said, and a lot of expletives that were in there. We can play it again here just to start it off. Here it is one more time. Effing embarrassing, it looks like. And then after that, it looks like, and then maybe something about being 6-8, something like that. So there are a number of things that I can take from this, and I don't read lips, but I can kind of see. I think I'm kind of on the right track with some of what I just guessed. John, do you have? Am I off base? You maybe can read lips. I don't know. Am I off base on that?
I got to be like bottom 5 percentile people who can read lips. I can read body language though. I know, like okay. I've made those exact faces before. I know exactly the exasperation that he's clearly expressing there. I don't know exactly what he said, but I think you're on the right track.
Okay. Again, I want to be certain that I credit Marshall Kramsky, the great local media members. Go give him a follow on X, etc. He's, that's been a sourced guy for this, but at any rate, I want to say this. It looks like this was a couple of different situations or a couple of different elements to this thing, right? Number one, frustration just in how the overall year has gone, right? And he's probably like, whoopee, 6-8, even though we're still alive, right? I mean, it's like, that's underachieving. Number two, that had to be a frustrating as hell day on offense, not only from his own individual standpoint, causing 3 turnovers, but the insane amount of penalties. The other maddening thing, John, was the horrible situation. Zach blamed it on the headsets about communication issues, plays getting called in late, delays of game, wasted timeouts, all that kind of stuff was all part of that. And then, of course, if you really want to be, tinfoil hat person, you kind of say, well, where are Joe and Zach at in their relationship right now based on how this year has gone? Those are the elements that I sense and or see. I don't know about you. What do you think?
I mean, I think that these exchanges, and I think you agree with this, these exchanges happen a lot more than we're privy to knowing. Sometimes the cameras catch it, sometimes they don't. These are very competitive people that just want the best. I do think that it's kind of a combination of everything, where it's a very frustrating day in terms of procedural errors regarding false starts, legal formations. And this, I think, happened right after a delay of game in which they were, again, like so
at
many
the goal
times,
line, right?
So many times do the Bengals find themselves in the red zone, deep in the red zone, and then moving backwards, whether it be a sack or a holding or some type of delay game. It happens so god dang often, right? Which makes the fact that they scored like 42 consecutive red zone appearances even more incredulous, considering how often they ended up losing progress rather than gaining it when they're all the way down there. The fact that it's been such a consistent problem, I think, leading up to this week, and the fact that it happened again in such a frustrating game, I think it was frustration in the moment, but it was also anchored by just how all of it's kind of built up over the year. So we don't have to read into so far as like, Zach, you're incompetent, I want you out of my life forever. I don't think it's that deep. I think it's just these are issues that shouldn't continuing to be happening in week 15
in year 5.
When you make the playoffs.
Yeah, in year 5. Yeah. I mean, it's and it's not like, again, this is why you hired Dan Pitcher, because you want to keep that engine rolling. You want to keep the continuity to a certain extent, even though he's not Brian Callahan. He worked under Brian Callahan. You want that, that battery to keep going of the same, familiar characters, familiar verbiage, familiar operation, all of that. And for this to keep happening, like you said, this late in the season, in this season, number 5, and in a season that is really, really frustrating, I think that is just where this is boiling over. I don't want to say it's a bad look or anything like that. I mean, I don't think you should. I like the fire, and I like the idea of, yeah, we won. I'm not satisfied with how we won today. I'm not satisfied with how we played today. And that's a mark of a good leader. That's a mark of a guy who's really trying to put the team on his shoulders. And I'm talking about Burrow in this respect, obviously. But I also think, this wasn't a game you lost and your playoff chances are officially dead either. So, I wish there was maybe a little bit of grace there, but I get the frustrations. I think in a lot of ways, fans have felt this way of what we're trying to translate in mouth reading or lip reading here. Embarrassing is a collective word in some of these losses. The defensive performances have been embarrassing, and it's like, man, 6-8. I still think a lot of people, and I have seen/listened to Colin Cowherd here and there the last couple of weeks, and he seems to be talking a lot about Burrow. Obviously, the Palmer quotes from late last week, were part of conversation. And then, today it was, how do the Bengals need to build around Burrow and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, well, I mean, I get it. They're 6-8, but they're not dead yet, so we got to see what happens. Slim chance they make something happen and get into the postseason, but I understand the frustration. They're still alive.
Yeah. And I think what's important with Joe is that he's always one to take accountability. Like, he's always one to kind of criticize himself for the mistakes that he makes in a public forum, in a public setting. And I think he kind of felt that frustration on his end as well. And again, that's what the open dialogue, the open communication between a quarterback and a head coach is. I'm interested to see, because I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. I don't think Burrow being like aggressively frustrated in the wake of winning is going to get old necessarily for Bengals fans. I think some, behavioral types like that, like sometimes it can kind of run its course and it can kind of be tiresome a little bit. But I think so long as there's still this general sense of frustration within the fan base that this team is not doing enough to support him and to complement the eliteness that he's showcasing on a weekly basis, I think so long as that exists, he will always have the grace of like, yeah, I like your fire. I like your non-complacency, because it's a direct contrast of what we believe the front office and the organization as a whole to be. So as long as that exists, I think he will always have the grace to kind of conduct himself this way. I can understand from another perspective where it can be looked at as like bratish or whatever the case may be, where he's like complaining just to complain, or what. Again, like, I'm not speaking about that. I just think that with that frustration from a completely different perspective, sometimes there's going to be projecting as to like that's why he's really frustrated. He's just frustrated at the organization as a whole. And that's why, you have types like Cowherd who are trying to make it into, or who are, speaking about like a bigger picture sense. And that's where like some of these conversations can kind of get into a little bit more than what they actually are, which is, again, just a quarterback and a head coach being frustrated about the on-field, inadequacies despite the win.
Yeah. Again, I mean, you can digest what you want out of it. You can take what you want out of it, but it is what it is. And I think a lot of people understand the frustration, and I respect the always wanting more. And I kind of sense, despite, and I'm not even talking about in season, right? I'm not talking about necessarily, I'm talking about going into this season. I have sensed this from this urgency, this, desire to be the absolute best and or keep getting better, be better from Burrow this year. I mean, that was kind of a mantra that he more or less shared throughout the spring and summer and then into the beginning of the season. And as the Bengals struggled, that's kind of carried on. But I think also, we talked about this, last calendar week has also been personally trying for him with what happened in his own residence and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I think there's just maybe a lot going on there, but I don't fault him or blame him really for being upset and or wanting different results for this season and in that game, potentially, obviously not the end result being a win, but the way they got there for sure. We're going to be here for just a couple minutes. I'm going to spring one on my, my co-host here. We didn't really talk about it. We kind of did, but I just want to take a brief look at the playoff picture just to show where things are at. Obviously, a big game yesterday at the late game of Denver and Indianapolis. That kind of shed a lot of light on some stuff, or at least maybe even muddied the waters. Actually, you have the Chiefs in the 1 seed, at least in the AFC side of things. The Bills, who just beat the Lions in talk about a wacky game there. They are the 2 seed. The Steelers are the 3 seed. The Texans are the 4 seed right now. The Ravens are the 5 seed. Broncos 6 seed. Chargers, who got absolutely stomped by the Buccaneers yesterday, they are in the 7 seed. Here are the Bengals, and as we mentioned last week, they're 10th in line here. The Colts lost 1 Bengals need to win out. I mean, we know that at this point. Colts lost to the Broncos and had a game. By the way, Jordan Battle wasn't the only guy who had this ridiculous fumbling before the end zone problem yesterday. Jonathan Taylor broke a big run that really could have started to get the Colts to run away with the game. Did the same thing, dropped the ball before crossing the end zone, touchback. Broncos get the ball and they don't really ever look back at that point. But regardless, Colts lose in Denver. So you could, I mean, they're, again, that's a game that was hard to kind of gauge exactly what you wanted out of that in terms of the Bengals perspective. But you have the Colts in the 8th seed. They lost yesterday. The Dolphins lost yesterday to the Texans, was it not? So they lost to the Texans. They are at the 9 seed and the Bengals are at the 10 seed. They needed, of the last 4 games, which included obviously this last Sunday, the Colts to lose 2, the Dolphins to lose 2, of course, accounting for the Bengals to win out, and then the Broncos to lose out. Now the Chargers are kind of in this mix, correct? The Chargers can lose out, and that's another path for the Bengals to potentially get into that 7th seed, if I'm not mistaken. So there are a couple of different paths. They are difficult ones for the Bengals, but they just got to beat who's in front of them. Yeah,
the Bengals, again, they can't get in with 8 wins, so they have to beat the Broncos. So if the Broncos win out, then the Bengals obviously would lose a game in which, they wouldn't get in. Or I think it doesn't really matter what the Chargers do at this point. The Chargers can win out and get the 5 seed, and so long as the Broncos lose, the Bengals would be the 7th seed in that regard, and the Ravens or the Steelers would be the 6th, probably the Ravens at this point. So, like you said, yesterday was a big step in terms of the Dolphins and Colts losing 1, and then they just have to lose. They each have to lose once in these final 3 weeks. Not very positive vibes coming from either of those teams at the moment. I don't think either of them have necessarily tough schedules to end the season, but that's why they play the games. It really is going to come down to this Thursday night game is going to be pretty important between the Broncos and Chargers. It's easier for the Bengals to just get in if the Broncos lose this one, because again, it doesn't really matter what the Chargers can do. Like the Broncos and the Bengals can get into the playoffs if the Chargers lose out, but it's easier if the Broncos were to just lose this game and the Bengals beat the Broncos next week. And then it comes down to if the Bengals beat the Steelers, like that puts them in a pretty good spot. So long as, again, the Colts and the Dolphins each lose one more.
Colts remaining schedule: hosting the Titans, at New York Giants, and hosting the Jaguars. So they have 2 divisional games, which, even though both those teams are struggling massively at the moment, you never know what can happen in divisional games, particularly in the last week of the season. If I'm not mistaken, wasn't there something last year between the Jaguars and the Colts in the final game of the season that cost, they had playoff implications and all that kind of stuff that wrecked seasons, if I can recount correctly. The Dolphins remaining schedule a little more difficult, sort of. They host the 49ers. That'll be an interesting game, with Shanahan and McDaniel. And then you've got they go to Cleveland. Cleveland struggling, what have you. And then Dolphins go to the New York Jets. Jets are struggling massively right now, but again, ending on a division game there, who knows what could happen there. So those are their remaining games. And then, of course, we can look at the Broncos. They just beat the Colts, and they go to LA to face the Chargers. Big game there. Then the Bengals host them right after Christmas, and then they play the Chiefs in Denver. So they've got the trickiest schedule, so to speak, the toughest. If you're looking at the quarterbacks they faced, it's Herbert, Burrow, and Mahomes down the stretch there. So that's not easy for them. So things could shake out. This is a little bit, in a way, a little bit reminiscent of where the Bengals were in 2011 with Andy Dalton in his rookie year, where they were kind of winning some games and beating the teams they were supposed to be. They were obviously surprising a lot of people that season, but they kind of snuck in because they got, were they 9-7 that year? I think they were 9-7 and they got help. And maybe that's what happens with the Bengals this year. Obviously different situation, different quarterback. And, you think they'd be a little scarier team in the postseason should they make it just because of who their quarterback is. But little bit of reminiscent of that season in terms of how things are shaking out.
I will say, and this is not gonna, I think this is gonna be not surprising and very welcome to a lot of people's ears. The Bengals would benefit greatly, I think, from the Chiefs losing. I don't think anyone has a problem with that, but only because you want the Chiefs to try and beat the Broncos in Week 18. You don't want the Chiefs to rest their starters in that game.
Yeah.
So if the Chiefs, like Patrick Mahomes has an ankle injury right now, we have no idea if he's going to play Saturday. We don't know if he's going to play Christmas Day. I don't know who they're playing Saturday. I know they play the Steelers on Christmas Day in Week 17. But if the Bills end up having a chance to play for that 1 seed, the Chiefs are obviously going to try to get that 1 seed to get the home field advantage. So, if Bengals fans weren't already rooting for the Chiefs to lose, they have extra reason as to why they want that to happen now.
Yeah, that's good. Fair point. Yeah, I mean, that last week, it either means the league is trying to set it up to make it mean something for almost everybody, but it's still oftentimes a situation where it doesn't mean anything for one of the teams, or maybe even sometimes both the teams. So we'll see what happens. That's the playoff picture and the remaining schedules. We're going to get out of here. John Sheeran, what do you got for the good of the order as we drop the mic and get on out of here for this episode of the Aftermath?
I was just thinking about the Jordan Battle play, and I thought it was interesting how it was Jamar Chase who was asked about it. He was one of the people who asked about it after the game, and he said, "Yeah, man, he just owes me a lunch." And I think that's like the best. Because again, like it happens so freaking often, you wonder how it still does happen. I guess with Battle, it was the excuse was that he was trying to change hands, which I don't know why you'd be doing that if you're already at the goal line.
As you're crossing the goal line, yeah, I don't get that one. Yeah.
I just thought it was an interesting approach from Jamar, where it's like, hey, like it's a mistake, we can't have that. Frankly, it did cost the Bengals a win earlier the year when it happened to Tanner. Obviously, it was a different situation, but he did fumble at the goal line and took 6 points off the board. So it has happened this year where the Bengals cost themselves by fumbling at the goal line. But I thought it's interesting how Chase is one of the true leaders of this team because of his play being so immaculate. People kind of follow to him. And I thought it was an interesting, not development, but insight into what his leadership looks like, where it's like, hey man, like I'm not going to fault you for hustling for 60 yards and nearly getting there, but we can't have that. So you owe me a steak dinner. Tough luck.
Yeah. That play was just, if that at the score at that time was 31-14, that would have brought it up to 38-14. Mm-hmm. If somehow that was a closer game, I think we all would have. If it was a closer game at that point in time, I think we all would have been like, oh man, is this how this one spirals out of control? Right. I mean, it was just kind of one of those, oh boy moments, but thankfully it was just kind of a hiccup in the grand scheme of things. I guess kept the game a little more interesting from the Titans perspective, but I mean, it is what it is. You move on. Hopefully you live and learn at this point, young player, and you don't do that again. So I don't have much else. Thank you, John Sheeran, for your insight. Thanks to all of you for tuning in live and after the fact. Again, get it on your favorite audio streamer through the Believe in Cincy podcast channel. Got to resubscribe to that. BLEAV in Cincy, part of the Believe podcast network. And of course, get it on your favorite video platform if you like, the Cincy Jungle Facebook page, a number of Twitter accounts, and or our YouTube channel. We appreciate all the support. We appreciate you hanging out with us and talking about another Bengals win. Let's hope they keep it rolling. John, have a good rest of your week, bud.
See you guys.